I'm almost 50, strong, clear, energized. Training hard, living clean, fully alive. But it didn't start here. 30 years ago, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and I felt hopeless. But I chose a different path. No meds, just science, discipline, and results. Now I'm symptom-free and asking the tough questions that move us all forward. This is Hope and Health. Let's go. Welcome to Hope and Health. I'm Mathew Embry, and today we're talking to Bill Code, who's been living with multiple sclerosis for more than 3 decades. This is a really exciting interview for me, and I've been really looking forward to it because you and I met 3 decades ago, I think right around the time you were diagnosed.
Absolutely. It was just about a year after. We met in Vancouver, of course. I remember very favorably meeting you and your dad. And the families knew each other a bit because my sister, Barbara, who also had MS even prior, knew your mom well. They've worked in nursing together.
This is a true honor for me to be able to interview you. You've been a huge voice for people with multiple sclerosis and have made such major contributions to helping our population and our community. Let's go back right to your diagnosis. Can you tell us about what happened? How did you know you were having these types of symptoms? And what was the diagnosis process like for you?
It happened fairly quickly. I was having a very stressful summer, and all of a sudden by mid-July, I had horrific fatigue, coping with things. I'd always had migraine headaches for almost a decade by then, and they were more frequent. And then I was cycling to work, as all good workaholics would, 6 kilometers from my home to workplace in the hospital. And my foot kept coming off the right pedal. And then I was noticing I had a lot of weakness in my legs, and my hand was disappearing in strength. By the time I left in late August that year, I couldn't empty a syringe with my right hand. And of course, anesthesiologists live and die with the syringe in their hand, so to speak.
And so what was that like for you? You started having these objective neurological symptoms. Did you know right away in the back of your mind that this was going to be MS?
Well, denial is very powerful. If anybody's really good at it, physicians are. And I was living in denial, despite my sister being diagnosed some 8 years before, and she's just 11 months older than I am. I went to see my family doc, and she said, well, we'll get you in to see a neurologist. And she expedited things extremely well. I went over to Vancouver to UBC. I was lucky enough to see Dr. Patey, who is the head of neurology over there and one of the world experts on diagnosing MS. I didn't know then, but I've learned since. And, he sat me down, and my wife was terribly relieved. And I was devastated because as a physician working mostly in the hospital, you only see the very tough cases that have had big advancement. Anyway, short story, he said, take 6 months off, Bill. No better after 6 months, take another 6 months off. And so the journey began. It's almost 3 decades, as you said.
Now, did you have to leave your job as an anesthesiologist? What did it mean for your real life day to day?
I did. Well, it was hell. I mean, I was just turned 43 and had 2 kids in private school and another youngster just starting university. And it was very tough. I thought at that time we were going to end up in a apartment in our little local town of Duncan and, be on welfare. It was a tough go after working so hard so many years.
So what were your first steps? I mean, back then there weren't too many pharmacological options. As a doctor, I hope maybe you had a better access, I would think, or is that true?
Well, I had big access to the pharmacologic actions, the beta-seron group, that group of medications was being used. My sister had been on Copaxone. She suggested that. My neurologist, Dr. Patey, said, Bill, you're doing well enough. We're going to get you on vitamin D. I was already on it, although I learned a lot more about it at that, MS Society conference for complementary and alternative choices for MS. So it kind of moved from there, but vitamin D was the main thing. And I did, once I'd heard you talk, literally at that conference, on the best bet diet, I gave up wheat completely. And I didn't give up dairy as well because I was an ice cream junkie to some degree. But, it took me a little longer to get over that.
So you changed some of your nutrition. You started adding vitamin D, or let's call it optimal dose vitamin D. What changes did you start to notice? And did you trust that path, or did you always keep an eye on conventional medicine as well?
Well, I've always been around looking for what are the new options, what are the best options. And I started to wonder whether there was any advantage. And because my neurologist didn't push for it, because often the neurologists do, um, it compounded a little bit because a few years later I was sent down to see a neurologist at Scripps Clinic in San Diego, California. And he felt it was primary progressive MS. And so there's not any choices at all for it. So that was always up in the air, but I wasn't in that relapsing remitting category. So I didn't have most of the drug options open to me.
So you went down that path. What kind of condition are you in today? And for people who are watching this and want to reverse engineer how you got to where you are today, what would be that blueprint?
The blueprint would be, I can walk, mobilize, run, jog, cycle, virtually all the things that I could do. I don't have super duper strength. I'm not near as fit as you are, but I aim to walk, 7,000 steps per day, sometimes longer. So that's the exercise piece for me. Although when we're home, we will cycle several kilometers together. And I use a recumbent bike because it enhances my stability options. Because my balance isn't perfect, but it's pretty excellent. People can't tell that I have a problem. So over that time frame, I expanded my diet issue. I changed my supplements. I got into, of course, fish oil. I got into optimal vitamin D. I met with the fellow, that's Dr. Vieth in Toronto. We chatted about that. And then I went on to slowly. And then 12 years ago, I learned a lot about extra oxygen. So at that time, hyperbaric, and I did a lot of hyperbaric treatments. And that was a big change for my cognitive challenges. Because as you may or may not know, 70% of us get cognitive challenges, and I certainly did. So it was a matter of trying to decide what I could do. I looked at the oxygen. I was lucky enough to go over and meet Dr. Philip James in Dundee, Scotland, who's probably the world expert on oxygen. He wrote a book, Oxygen in the Brain, The Journey of Our Lifetime, and had done a lot of oxygen work. And the other thing I learned then was that in 1983, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, was a double-blind controlled trial done in upstate New York, showing that it made a difference to the attacks of MS patients, and they published it. And did it change anything? No, they held it up for about 6 months and put in an article about a chemotherapy agent for MS and said, this is the new path. So then I continued to diverge with that. And because now I'm talking about kind of different or contentious issues, I'm going to take just a half a minute and read this undertaking, because of course I've had interactions with my College of Physicians and Surgeons. I'm retired for a year, so I must not use the term doctor. So now I'm Bill Code MD. I can use the MD because it's from my university. Anyway, this is what they required me to state when I speak. The Canadian Medical Association Code of Ethics and Professionalism requires that a physician clearly indicates when they present an opinion that is contrary to the accepted views of the profession. Therefore, I am required by the College of Physicians and Surgeons of British Columbia to advise you that the Government of Canada has issued a public advisory indicating that ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine are not authorized to prevent or treat COVID-19 and may cause serious health problems. So, end of undertaking. And so I've been told to keep saying that even by my lawyer, even today, because they kind of have a long arm from the college. Some days I would rather I was living in Alberta, where it's not quite as contentious, but the college there is pretty dramatic too. So anyway, enough said about that. So the oxygen made a difference, and that's why I was able to get enough brain recovery to write that, probably the major book of my lifetime, Solving the Brain Puzzle. Came out in 2019, right before COVID happened. And since then, it's been a journey I gave a major talk in Toronto on how to solve brain problems. One of those was MS, and mostly it was based on oxygen, but not just hyperbaric. It was based on home oxygen, where people would buy a concentrator, use it at home with an oxygen non-rebreathing mask. Just means a mask with a plastic bag underneath it, acts as a reservoir. And they'd use that for 30 minutes twice a day. So I've continued to use that dramatically. I will use hyperbaric. The study of now 5 million exposures of MS people to hyperbaric in the UK shows that if you do it once a week, your MS stabilizes completely.
For people who don't know anything about hyperbaric oxygen therapy, can you tell us what it is, how it works? I mean, what do people actually have to do to get this? And then we'll get into some of the science on how it's helping people with MS.
Well, sure. So probably wise to back up just a little bit. First of all, hyperbaric oxygen has been around since the 1700s. They've used it for treatment of many things. Most of you will have heard of through the bends. People go down under pressure underwater. They come back up, and the nitrogen bubbles seem to really dramatically affect thinking and joints and other things. So that is what has been used on. So if we look at the possibility, and this is my work along, especially with Dr. James in Scotland, talking about MS in my book, chapter 19, I called it the new MS. And the new MS stands for microvascular syndrome, recognizing, in our opinion, that the issue with MS is lack of blood flow in the tiny vessels, very tiny, much smaller than a human hair. Okay. So those tiny vessels are either blocked up, and that creates secondary lack of oxygen or hypoxia, and that triggers inflammation and a leaking blood-brain barrier. So on this part, we agree even with the neurologist today.
Okay, so to stop you there, again, for people who are just watching this who don't necessarily have a science or a medical background, we're talking about little veins inside the brain and throughout the body. Is that what we're talking about?
That's exactly true. And it's especially key in the brain because the brain super needs oxygen. And then I'll go on and talk about, the resting neuron. So give people more hope that they can reverse their scenario.
Okay, so your assumption or your hypothesis then is that for people with MS, they have all these blockages like in these microveins, and that because you're not getting the proper blood flow, you start to get the myriad of symptoms that come from that.
Exactly so. Exactly so. And because the number one trigger for inflammation in the body is lack of blood flow and secondary hypoxia. And because the brain needs a super amount of oxygen to think in the neurons. And if it doesn't get enough, the neuron doesn't die, it goes to sleep or becomes hibernating or resting. The same happens in the outside watershed area in a stroke. Some people would call MS series of miniature strokes. That isn't accepted in the issue yet because the vessels are too tiny. They're so tiny you cannot see them on MRI. They're way smaller than a human hair. To give you a relationship, a red blood cell is 7 microns. And the 7 microns is extremely small, and it tries to go through these tiny vessels, 5 microns, even down to 2 microns. So it's that lack of flow through that zone which creates the problem. And you can reverse that by 2 methods: improving the flow, which is good. The body can't do more blood pressure. That won't work, because as you know, by the time you get to the micro capillaries or veins, there isn't a pressure change that you can permit. And the other method is you can bump up the amount of oxygen flowing through that way. So when you go into a hyperbaric oxygen chamber, which is literally a pressurized unit, and you're usually breathing either in that chamber or through a mask, 100% oxygen, all of a sudden you can flood the body with more oxygen, 12 to 15 times what we would get on room air. And that allows it to get into these little crevices and corners and start to improve the recovery. So you can do two things. You can improve the flow, and there's other ways. I'll talk about that in a minute, or you can bump the oxygen up. This bumps up the oxygen and the cognition or brain thinking starts to recover.
Okay, so by adding all this oxygen, we're starting to see improvement. And is that scientifically documented? Have you seen this?
It is. It is. And, the best documentation done in a double-blind controlled manner was in upper state New York, as I mentioned earlier, where they showed that it made a difference in recovery. And since then, there's been a lot of research, mostly in Israel, actually, where they show that people improve their cognition, they improve their thinking. If you do 20 treatments in a chamber, you boost your stem cells, your personal stem cells, 6 to 8 times. If you do 40 sessions, you create new tiny blood vessels where they're needed in the body, in my case, the brain. And if you even do 60 sessions, which is popular now in parts of, Florida and the Middle East, then you can actually improve your cognition dramatically. And you can even lengthen your telomeres, which are kind of your aging piece in the body.
So for you, can you share your journey? Like what happened to you once you started to be treated with hyperbaric oxygen therapy?
Well, I found initially that it was a great way to treat my migraine headaches. And as you know, migraine headaches are in 70% of us with MS because it's a microvascular problem in its own right. And so then the second piece I started to notice was that I had better ability to reason and think. By the time I started that 12, 13 years ago, I had trouble reading a complex novel or a complex journal article because I just didn't have the concentration, focus, and ability to work that. So that started to improve fairly dramatically. So I was really excited about that. As you're probably aware, those of us with MS, we've got double the risk of brain problems, dementia, and so on. So anything to start to reverse that made me very excited. And so as I started to get hope, then I started to work hard to try and let other people know pieces that they could use in their own healing recovery puzzle and, get things back to closer to normal.
Now, when it comes to this therapy, how does the average person access this? Is it safe? And how much cost are we looking at?
Well, it's extremely safe. In Canada, it's unregulated, meaning that people with training and training in the safety of it, because it's incredibly safe. Almost all of the safety is in the quality engineering. And I'm talking about a hard case chamber, which will go up to, right now we're sitting at 1 atmosphere, okay, of pressure. A little bit less for you because you're in Calgary. I did my anesthesia residency in Calgary. I'm where it's about, 3,300 feet. So as you move that pressure forward, it pushes more oxygen in through the lungs and into the body. The only side effect tends to be ear pressure. Some of you will have noticed when you fly in an airplane or even go down a steep hill that your ears will pop. Well, if your ears don't pop, it's painful. It's pressure. So in some of those cases, they have to reset and take people gradually forward. Or in rare cases, they'll have to not go in that day, wait till they're cold or whatever is better. And then the equalization between the back of the throat through the eustachian tube to the middle ear is opened up. And then they can equilibrate the pressure because you need to equal that pressure on both sides of the eardrum. And that is the number one side effect or problem or risk with hyperbaric chambers. Where I live on the island, I think it's $150 for a 1-hour session at depth. I think in Calgary, it's in that range or maybe $200. The biggest challenge, though, and the reason I, along with Dr. James, started to look at other choices is there's probably only 40 or 50 hyperbaric chambers in Canada that are the hard chamber type. So that's why we started to look at so-called normal baric. And that means at the atmospheric pressure sitting around you. So you buy an oxygen concentrator, roughly the size of the small suitcase you carry with you, put on on the airplane over your seat, and that turns in and runs out 5 to 10 liters a minute. If you do that, you don't get as major amount of oxygen flowing through the brain, but you get 4 to 5 times the normal amount. That is enough to trigger those healing spots in the body. So that's very exciting to me, because now you can do it in your own home, living room. I suggest strongly that you purchase your own unit. They're around $1,000, or you could pay $1,600 and get one that flows at 10 liters a minute as opposed to 5. 5 will work for when you're sitting in your chair, reading a book or watching television or going through your email. Okay. 10 liters will allow you to use it while you're exercising. And I'm sure you're more aware of this than I am, but it's called exercise while oxygen training. So that gives you the benefit of the exercise, increasing your blood flow throughout the body. At the same time, you're boosting your oxygen with a slightly different mask, but it's just a mask and still can be done at home. You can't go on a long cycle, of course, because you can't get an oxygen tubing long enough, but you're hooking this into the concentrator. So the concentrator literally takes the room air around you and puts it through a so-called molecular sieve and takes out almost all the nitrogen in the air, which is nearly 80%, and gives you 95% oxygen. In fact, a major hospital in Winnipeg has been using this oxygen concentrator technique for nearly 40 years now as their only oxygen source. So it's getting more and more popular. Even in hyperbaric sessions, they used to run them with liquid oxygen, and now they use concentrators because they can store it in a tank and away they go. So by doing that, and I would recommend you do it at least 30 minutes twice a day. Or if you're getting an MS attack, sit down, put it on for an hour. It usually will help the attack break, or you could wear it a little longer. You'll be most favorable to use it when you're sitting up or standing, because we get better gas exchange in the lungs to the blood flow when we're doing that. Okay? Sitting or standing.
Now, are there any dangers when it comes to this? Can you take too much?
You can't take too much. The big worry, and you mentioned a very good point, because there's a great deal of fear of oxygen in our medical community, and most of it isn't warranted. It started first with newborns or prematures. They would give them high oxygens to resuscitate them and keep them going for a few days. And then, unfortunately, when they quit the oxygen, they quit it dramatically or quickly, and they went on to vision problems, so-called retrolental fibroplasia. So it was studied initially and probably 20 and 30 years ago and published in the literature that if you tapered the extra oxygen off, then you would not have the vision problem. And in addition, we of course got pulse oximeters or little stickies on the baby's skin, or a method to follow their oxygen. So we didn't use any more extra oxygen than we needed. So that was a really important piece, and that was part of it. The second place people worry about a lot is those with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. These are long-term smokers most often. And the worry is that the extra oxygen will take away their interest in breathing, so-called take away their lack of oxygen or hypoxic drive. But reality is that virtually never happens, even in them. So in most regular people, the one thing you might do is limit it to an hour or two at a time, okay? Because some people with the dryness of the air will develop discomfort of the chest wall, and so they'll lose confidence in the treatment. But that is a matter of just controlling it. If you're sitting up awake, you put it on for an hour, you're never going to have any of that. If you want to use it longer term, then you just turn the flow on the oxygen concentrator down to say 3 liters a minute and put it with these nasal specs that you see all the time in emergency. They just go in the nostrils around the ear. And that will limit the oxygen to 30, 35%, which you can wear 24/7 without a problem. So oxygen is much, much safer than we predicated it into.
So if I'm at home and I'm watching this, or I'm watching this on a podcast and I've got multiple sclerosis, you would think that someone should use one of these oxygen concentrators about an hour a day, 2 sessions of half an hour.
Correct. Absolutely.
And that would be at 10 liters, you said?
Well, you'd save a little money if you bought a 5 liter per minute.
Yeah.
But you could buy the 10 if you wanted. Either one. The flow is not a problem. The flow doesn't make much difference, but it's enough to keep that bag, a reservoir bag, full, so that when you breathe in, you can take a full breath in of almost pure oxygen. That will be delivering about 70 to 80% oxygen. So just over double what you would do on these nasal specs.
Now, what about someone who doesn't have multiple sclerosis? Someone who's just looking to achieve optimal health?
I recommend it all the time. I recommend it for headaches. In that talk I gave at the University of Toronto back in September, I recommended it for peripheral neuropathy. It's a huge assist for concussion or post-concussion or traumatic brain injury. Okay. And so it also is a huge assist post-stroke. All right. Because all of these have these so-called resting neurons, which are ready to work again once they get enough energy. How do they get energy? They take the benefit of the oxygen getting into the mitochondria, the energy-making power center of the cell, and it can increase the mitochondria up to 1,000-fold in the brain. You get more energy, the cell neuron wakes up, and it works again. So that's why it's important in a multi-system or challenges, or even just improving your memory or reversing some tough memory changes.
Interesting. Now, my brother and I, we both complain that when we come back to Calgary from traveling and going places of sea level, that we get headaches and we feel just awful. Is it possible that we could be having this type of effect simply because of the altitude and the lack of oxygen?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The barometric pressure really matters. When I am landing in a new place or traveling to a new place, I always look up the barometric pressure. It's right on the phone. If you scroll down in your weather app, you can read it. For instance, here today, it's 1018. So kind of in the middle range. It'll go as high as 1040. It'll go down to 980. These are millimeters of mercury of the atmospheric pressure. But that alone is a 5 to 10% difference. Your landing in Calgary, which is 3,300 feet, is already a fairly dramatic reduction in the amount of oxygen available. It's still 21% in the air, the molecules, but because there's less pressure pushing those molecules down, there's less density of the oxygen molecules. And that's why you would feel better. And that's why when I lived in Calgary, we'd get a Chinook, which is usually a huge drop in barometric pressure. I get ripping headaches, as most with migraines do.
Interesting. Now, what about for teenagers or seniors?
Teenagers, it's fantastic, certainly for the headaches, but also for traumatic brain injury. And, in the next piece, I'd like to talk a little bit about oil, because those two are additive to each other. And seniors, I think my suggestion is everybody should have one of these at home. I live in British Columbia. Sometimes the emergency room is closed. If the emergency room is closed, the ambulance isn't coming. You've got a stroke or a heart attack, or I've had a head injury or a crush injury or a hand or a headache. You can sit down with your oxygen concentrator, put it on at least an hour, maybe a little longer, and you can do many of the same things. In fact, unfortunately, the fear is so high in the emergency room, and even the ambulance attendant, they're instructed, if the person is still breathing on their own, they don't add extra oxygen. And that's unfortunate, because it could really make a difference toward recovery.
Now, for you, how important has it been to get this message out there? Is this why you wrote the book? Is this why you're doing the podcast? Is this something that you believe that people all over the world need to know?
Well, I believe it very strongly, and that's why I'm writing a new book. And I'm writing the new book. It will talk about the oxygen, especially at home. The initial title for the book was Oxygen at Home for Memory and More. Okay. I've modified it since because in early October, I learned about a special kind of fish oil which manages to get into the body better and more completely. Because I looked at your website, you mentioned a very good quality fish oil, Carlson's. But the change that's happened in the last decade or so, mostly out of the University of Oslo in Norway, they've learned that if they add the polyphenols of a high quality olive oil to the fish oil after they've extracted it from the fatty fish, then it protects those omega-3 fatty acids and they're much more available for use in the body. When I was in my journey early on, it looked like fish oil was one of the things that might help me because it was high in omega-3s. I knew omega-3s are very good for anti-inflammatory, and they compensate for the omega-6s, which tend to be excess or pro-inflammatory. And then I learned in October last year that there was a new development. They'd now taken the fish oil, because when they take the fish oil from the oceans, they take it from fatty fish, and typically they need to clean it up. They clean up the microplastics, they clean up the PCBs, they clean up the heavy metals. And unfortunately, when they clean those up, they take the protective polyphenols, which were made by the algae in the first place, because the algae make the fish oil components, EPA and DHA, and the fish just eat them. So they strip out those polyphenols. Now those very bare naked omega-3s are exposed to oxygen and other things around them, and they start to go rancid almost immediately. Even when you swallow them, in a perfect world, they've been kept really good shape, but they oxidize even before they get to the cells in the body. But if they've got the polyphenols, so the polyphenols, which were present, are stripped, but while it's still under a so-called nitrogen cover, they add in a high-end set of polyphenols from a very quality pre-harvest olive oil. So what they end up making is a so-called balance oil, which is 60% quality fish oil and 40% olive oil. So the polyphenols, of course, are beneficial in their own right, and they make a difference as far as antioxidants, but the big thing is they protect the fish oil. I noticed within a month of starting this that my brain was working better. I was starting to have less gut troubles because I had irritable bowel syndrome, which is unfortunately really common in MS, and we all know the gut-brain connection. And I was starting to feel better than I had for some time. And the big also reason was my fatigue improved. So since then, I've done a lot of study on this, the very recent articles, and they're quite huge on omega-3 just in the last 5 years, and showing that it makes a huge difference if the DHA, which is one of the pieces of fish oil, gets into the brain or into any of the cells in the body. They make new lining around the cell called cell membrane, and at the same time, they make new membranes inside the mitochondria, the energy-making part of the cell. As such, they're terrifically able to improve your fatigue problems. So energy, better cell function, all cells in the body work better, including the heart cells, including preventing 90% potential reduction in ventricular fibrillation, which is the usual sudden death in young men, old men, men and women.
Now, how much of this should people be taking?
They recommend that they take 0.15 mils per kilogram. So if I was 100 kilograms, I would take 15 mils, which is a full tablespoon. Now I'm about 80 kilograms, but I take a tiny bit extra. I take right next to or in that. And you can take it, for example, in a post-concussion person, they might take that amount 3 times a day and hugely help the recovery path from concussion. Even to the point that if they're not very conscious and they've got a feeding tube in, they put it in the feeding tube 3 times a day and they would start to wake up. And that's why I'm very excited about giving hope back to folks with MS, because that is a blood vessel problem and a flow problem. And here's the piece of icing on the cake. So you already gleaned from me, I'm a huge fan of extra oxygen. And I've learned now that the red blood cells, which are the little donut-shaped red cells that travel around the body, they change their membrane a new cell every 4 months, okay? But what they also do is they change the membrane of the cell, and now the cell is more flexible and squishy. Instead of a stiff red blood cell, you've got an elongated or able to roll up red blood cell, and now it can enter into tinier blood vessels. Now, as not just down to 5 microns, because remember it's 7 microns, but even down to 2 microns. So now you've got a second method of increasing the oxygen delivery to the neurons and other brain cells and heart cells, another method so they can have better function of their mitochondria and energy production.
Well, Bill, this information is invaluable to people with multiple sclerosis. If someone was diagnosed today, if you had to have a conversation with a newly diagnosed MS patient, what would your advice be to them?
Well, I would recommend do all the dietary changes that you recommend or some variation of that with the person, okay? I would recommend get on this very quality fish oil, recommend they optimize their vitamin D, and they can measure it. I would recommend to convince them they have their own omega-3s and 6s ratio measured, and it's now done by this same company in Norway. They have an independent company do a little blood poke, put a couple of dots of blood on a piece of paper, and within 2-3 weeks, they get their measurement back. But now they can confirm. And we know we're dreadful in North America. Our average ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 is 25-1. You optimally would need it 3-1. In 1910, it was 2-1, 3-1, even 1-1. But over the years, as we've increased our seed oil intake and omega-6 intake, and our other diet of ultra-processed foods has gone downhill in a handbasket, we've gone way out of whack. When I did my first measurement, and I was trying to eat pretty clean, reasonable, and mine was 7.9-1. 4 months later, it was down to 5.1-1. So I'll keep on the path, and I should get it down to 3-1. We know if you can get it down to 3-1 or even 4-1, your cardiovascular risk problems go down by 70%. And why am I talking about hearts? Because remember, most brain issues are a microvascular problem. It's a blood vessel flow oxygen delivery issue. So they all tie together. So get your blood tested. You don't have to guess. The new name for it is called test-based nutrition. Now, you will know, Matt, that you can get those measured. You see a naturopath or an enlightened physician, they send it down to the US or somewhere. It isn't a very optimal test that we get in Canada. It's just a single one shot. This other one gives you 12 different fatty acids in your own measurement. But the only ones you need to look at is this ratio of omega-6 to 3, and also you call it the omega-3 index, which is now becoming a major way to check for heart risk. And if you can get that down to that normal number, you hugely improve. And at the same time, as you're doing that, and because what it is, it's a ratio of the EPA and DHA to all the fatty acids in the cell. And that's why the Japanese, even though they smoke and other lifestyle changes aren't optimal, they have a 90% risk less of these ventricular fibrillation cardiac issues. So all of these pieces fit together so that someone newly diagnosed with MS, and ideally they would buy an oxygen concentrator, use it for 30 minutes twice a day, especially if they have an attack, and Bob's your uncle. They could control most of their own life.
And so you firmly believe that multiple sclerosis is a disease that can be controlled?
I do. Absolutely. I've always said controlled, and I think, you've done the same. Cure is not a fair enough thing, but control, so you control your destiny. The new buzzword, in the circles I'm in, self-care is healthcare.
Self-care is healthcare. Bill, we're going to leave it at that. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share your invaluable knowledge with us. And just by simply maintaining your health has been an inspiration to me, and I know many others in the MS community. So thank you for what you do.
Well, thank you for what you do, Matt. You do great work.
Thanks for joining us. Hope and Health is made possible through generous donations. To learn more or support the show, visit mshope.com, where you'll find free science-based resources.